during a spiritual awakening, it's very common for us to become aware of just how much fear we have in our personal lives and how much fear is creating our collective reality. So today, I'm going to be explaining exactly what fear is and how we process fear so that we can responsibly spiritually evolve. The more aware we become, the more we see that fear is at the roots of all of the different issues and all of the different problems and conflicts that we see show up inside reality, whether it's our personal reality or whether it's our collective reality. Fear acts as a metaphysical force, and that metaphysical force is called separation. So it's very important for us to learn fear in all of the different ways that fear operates and what to do about it. Because sometimes we just automatically want to reject fear and we want to ignore it. We might think that because fear is the metaphysical force of separation, that it is bad and it is wrong, and therefore we need to reject it. But fear's far more complicated than that. So we're going to need to develop intimacy with fear so that we can fully understand it and then fully transmute it. So how we can begin to develop intimacy with fear is by understanding that fear is a trinity. Fear is the trinity of separation, division, and constriction. So fear constricts. That is constricting our life force. And when it constricts, what it does is create separation and division. And that's the metaphysical force of fear. The metaphysical force of fear is to constrict something. And when it constricts, it turns into division and separation. So in separation consciousness, it is the lowest level of consciousness because we are operating purely from the reptile brain, the part that's only looking at everything through an us versus them and through threats. This makes us go into survival mode of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And when our consciousness is constricted into survival mode, that is called scarcity consciousness. So love and fear are counterbalancing forces within creation. Love is the metaphysical force that unifies, and fear is the metaphysical force that separates or constricts. That is why fear is not bad. It is simply a cosmic force that helps us experience the illusion of separation so that we can be individuals. But when fear becomes the dominant vibration in our reality, it manifests as control and narcissism. If you'd like to have a deeper understanding of these pathways of fear and love, you can watch my video, The Spiritual Origins of Narcissism. This is why it is so important to see the full spectrum of fear, so that we don't avoid fear, but that we also don't normalize fear. There is a huge difference between promoting fear and developing intimacy with fear. What needs to be learned first is that fear is the metaphysical force of separation. And the metaphysical force of separation is at the very roots of all of the different conflicts and all of the different problems inside our reality. What we do is we virtue signal. We feel and pretend like we're emotionally intelligent all because we see other people who are using escapism to avoid fear. Do not fall into the largest trap on this earth, which is going to one extreme simply because we can notice the imbalance of the other extreme. So we don't need to defend fear, and you're not helping fear. Fear wants to be transmuted. It doesn't need to be defended. It just needs to have intimacy developed with it. Because what you will find is that when you develop intimacy with fear, you see and experience fear far less. And it's not because you're trying to avoid it. It's because it feels so thoroughly secure within your being that it no longer has to express as the energy of fear. Because fear is constriction. Fear shows up when we are constricted, when our consciousness is so constricted that now we are seeing everything as completely separate. And when we're perceiving everything through the lens of separation, constant division, what we're doing now is going into a very low frequency that can only access scarcity consciousness because it is in the reptile brain. It is only concerned with survival, and it filters all of the information that it's receiving from the outside world through the perception of safety and through the perception of threats. So when we're looking at things through the lowest possible level of consciousness, which is trying to observe constant threats, trying to look at everything in order for us to become hypervigilantly aware of our surroundings, what we're doing is in such a low state of consciousness where we're always seeing everything very divided, very us against them, me against this. There's everything through the lens of something versus something else. So there's everything is either against us or there's just all of these threats, because that's what happens when we're operating in a lower consciousness. We're only seeing everything very divided. That's also why it's been proven that racism is the lowest level of intelligence a person can have. It's because what's racism? Well, there's literally prejudgment, prejudice against somebody for what? For being separate. But as with everything in this reality, there is always a positive polarity. There is always a positive expression of any quality or attribute, including fear. So even though fear has very negative properties as well, and is why we can't have nice things, fear also has a very positive role it plays, and that is within our biofeedback system, as well as our intuition. Yes, fear operates a part of our intuition. So fear is a vital messenger, just like any other emotional state. It is meant to communicate and be a messenger to us. So our intuition can also use fear, just like it would use joy or just like it would use happiness. Fear is just as vital of a messenger for our intuition. So a lot of times we make a big mistake by thinking that we're in fear and therefore we need to somehow do some sort of technique to get out of fear or try to manage the fear and bring sense to it. And in reality, it's divine. It's our intuition, and we're trying to stop or avoid or block off our intuition. The only way we will ever know if fear is actually communicating something very important and vital to us through our intuition, or if it's acting from a lower level of frequency and dragging us into our reptile brain and therefore causing more division and more fear, is if we become very intimate with fear. We cannot know why we are experiencing fear. We won't know what fear is trying to communicate to us if we let it completely override us and be the invisible creator of our reality. Or if we don't actually understand fear. So what we have to do is become very unafraid of our fear. We have to be very open and very unafraid of when fear is being felt. And I know that's funny because it's like, how do you become unafraid of fear? Well, when you become unafraid of fear, you will just automatically ascend. It is law. But it takes practice like anything. It takes practice just like how we learned once upon a time how to ride a bike, and now it's so second nature to us that we don't even have to think about the dynamics. That's how becoming unafraid of fear is. It's something where we just allow ourselves, once fear arises, to be felt, because we're not making it mean anything, but we're also not trying to defend it. What we're able to do is now just create an open space for it to be in fear. We can allow ourselves to be in fear. When we give ourselves the space to consciously be in fear, if it's not consciously being in fear, then you're just going to keep recycling unconscious, unprocessed fear. So don't do this if you don't plan on becoming just very conscious of the fear. Because I see this happen a lot of times. I see people be very unconsciously cycling inside fear, and then they can't get out of it. And they just keep getting stuck in fear because they think because they know they're in fear that they transmuted it. It's not enough for us to just know we're in fear. That's not processing fear. Anyone can just know they're in fear. That doesn't mean that we did anything spiritual or any alchemy or anything with fear. When we consciously process fear, it's when we are aware of the fact that we are giving fear a space for it to arise inside our field. When we let fear arise inside our field, how we process it is by giving it the attention and the love and the validation that it wants. And I know that that might be confusing because if we validate it, doesn't that mean that it will grow? No. If you just validate fear's experience, now fear will feel like you are a safe person to be with. So if you give it the attention, and if you give it the space that it needs to feel fear, what happens is it feels like we are more safe. And when fear feels like we are more safe to be in, to be with, then fear doesn't need to show up and be expressed so much through that level of intensity that we're calling fear. Fear is a specific level of intensity. It won't need to show up as fear if we're always okay and we're always going to give it the attention, the awareness, and the presence that it needs. So the more we're able to just be okay with fear and be present with it, what happens is fear doesn't show up as much. And that's why there's this large confusion when you hear really high advanced spiritual teachings talk about how fear is an illusion. That's true. It's just at such a high level of mastery that we shouldn't aim towards it. But it's good to know the rewards. It's good to know the fruits of a certain process. And the more a person becomes available and conscious and present with fear, it will show up way less in life, way less, to the point where it's only appearing when something is super appropriate for it to appear. And there are appropriate times for us to be in fear. But a master isn't trying to make fear never show up in their reality. A master is already emotionally intelligent enough to be aware of the fact that there is appropriate times for us to be in fear. So we're not trying to fight fear. And we don't look at ourselves as a failure when we have fear. So the more gentle we are with ourselves, with fear, the less fear has to show up and express that level of intensity. But the reason why we should not be defending fear is because there are whole timelines where fear is the dominant vibration of that entire collective reality. And those are called the lower timelines. The lower timelines are ones of de-evolving. So if you have a dominant vibration of fear, it will continue to separate. It will continue to constrict. It will continue to divide. And that division is called de-evolution. And when we're in a de-evolution timeline, that's a lower timeline for reality. And all of the things that are created inside those timelines are manifested from the dominant vibration of fear. So they're not good creations. They're not healthy. They're not conscious creations. So even though it is healthy for us to become loving to our fear. And even though we cannot be emotionally intelligent if we block ourselves off from fear, there is no such thing as being emotionally intelligent if we don't know how to process fear. So fear is also a sacred rite of passage. But we have to know that if fear becomes the dominant vibration of a consciousness, that there's severe manifestations and severe forms of devolving. The concept of fear gets tossed around and confused so much that we can't actually see sometimes that by becoming aware of whatever we're afraid of, that is actually how to create positive changes. And this is so vitally important because a lot of times messages that sound fearful need to get out to the public, and they're not really meant to create more fear, even though it's a fearful message. It's meant to create conscious awareness of something so that then we can take positive and conscious actions to advert that fear, to advert that creation that is fearful. So it's very important for us to understand fear inside out so that when fear arises, we understand if it's connecting and tapping into the mental body or if it's connecting and tapping into our emotional body. What is it doing inside our emotional body? Is it just festering? Is it just proliferating inside our emotional body? We cannot have discernment if we are not emotionally intelligent. There is no way to be a discerning person if we are not emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence goes hand in hand with discernment. They cannot exist without one another. So how we have more discernment also helps us have more emotional intelligence. And what we're having more discernment around and more emotional intelligence around is what to do with fear. What is fear and what do we do with it? When we identify fear and we give it the space it needs to just be felt, we can even remove whatever we're thinking about the fear. We can remove the narrative that came along with the fear, and we just give fear our undivided attention. We give our feeling of fear the spotlight. So we're only feeling the fear. We're literally being a vessel for just fear to have its way of expressing. When we do that, what's happening is we're moving its vibration. It has space now to move. It didn't have space before to move because our mental body was just thinking about it, so it locked it into place. Or our emotional body, it was just festering. We weren't doing anything with it. It was just taking the show. How we stop both our mental body and our emotional body from just being unconsciously controlled by fear is by consciously giving fear physical, visceral expression. We just allow fear to fully be felt. All of it. We just let it all come to the surface, and it gets to have its time where it just consciously does all of its activity, and it's very fearful. And the more we just are open and allowing and give this presence, that is the process. That's how we process fear. Because I can't tell you how many times people think that because they're aware of fear, that means that they're like conscious or processing it, because like that's not enough. That's just something we can become aware and know anything going on, and that doesn't mean that we're consciously processing something. So to develop intimacy with fear, we have to allow it to have the space for it to be felt, for it to move in vibration. If fear is constricted, then imagine yourself as an open space that allows it to rise and not be constricted. Now it gets to move in vibration. Well, when it rises That's called exaltation. It's exalting. If we don't allow fear to have enough space and attention and presence, then it can't move in vibration. It can't exalt. And when we do this, we'll see that it takes on a rhythm. If you'd like to know what I mean about fear taking on a rhythm, you can watch my video, Your Ascension Journey. What is ascension? In that video, I talk about how now fear will just take on a rhythm of constriction, but then it'll move out of constriction and our consciousness will turn more into expansion. And then the rhythm will go constriction, expansion, expansion, constriction. We will experience constriction less, but we don't need to get rid of all of the constriction. The higher timelines for humanity are higher because they're more conscious. Because they are more conscious, they are more expanded. So when we take on the rhythm of having fear constrict our consciousness, but then we expand, and then we expand more, and then we might constrict from fear. But we're only constricting because the rhythm of this universe needs different colors to paint with. So there's always going to be a dance between fear and love. We just want to make sure that consciousness, that expansion, that love has more of the dominant vibration. The higher timelines for humanity aren't higher timelines because they're rejecting fear. They're higher timelines for humanity because they are more conscious. And when you are more conscious, you still have fear arise, but it's far less and it's not controlling your whole reality. No one should be defending fear, because if a person is truly operating dominantly from the vibration of fear, that has such violent and malicious and manipulative and controlling expressions in our external manifestation that we wouldn't consciously, a healthy mind wouldn't defend fear like that. We would instead treat fear very maturely, like something that needs to be acknowledged and become aware of. The metaphysical force of fear always will manifest as control. So you could look at the metaphysical force of fear, aka separation, always creating a mirror of control. So fear creates separation, and separation manifests as control. As conscious individuals who are going through a spiritual awakening, we have to understand this metaphysical force, this esoteric force of fear leading to control. If we don't understand that fear will create the manifestation of control, then we're going to accidentally virtue signal and psychologically buzzword our way into a vicious cycle and get locked into lower timelines for humanity. We have to know that fear creates the external manifestation of control. So the more you can get people to live in fear, the more you can spread things that have to do with fear and have to do with threats into our collective mind, the more you can have control over those people. There is no such thing as a person being in consciousness and in love and being controlled. It is the opposite vibration. You would need to have a person in fear first before you can control them. So you would need to manipulate a person's consciousness into their fear zone, into their reptile brain. And then from there, you can control them better. I hope this has made you fearless. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.